Another 10th review. I guess that means I'm talking about equines again. And when you think of horses in animation, you usually picture a helper, a sidekick, that animal the hero rides. There are exceptions, of course, and one that served as the star of their own anthology series was none other than the only sheriff in the world who could somehow use a pistol with hooves, Quick Draw McGraw. So far, the Quick Draw McGraw show is the oldest cartoon I've entertained the possibility of reviewing. I guess I'm one of those people whose interests get older as they get older, but I've been meaning to give more coverage to vintage animation. And how much more vintage can you get than a 50s cartoon with a western setting? The dawn of television as a mainstream medium, and the first popular genre for action series on the tube. A history of television and western shows at large would be too big to kick this review off with, so here's the historical context behind just the Quick Draw McGraw show. This was the third cartoon for TV to be produced by Hanna-Barbera Productions. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were the creators of Tom and Jerry for MGM, but upon moving from theatrical shorts to television, encountered a problem known as budgeting. The money they were given per short on television was around 10% of what they were given on Tom and Jerry, so they had to cut every corner they could, limit the animation to when it's absolutely needed, and emphasize the dialogue and sound effects more. The late 50s were a time of incremental growth for Hanna-Barbera. 1957's The Rough and Ready show was very much an early test run for if TV animation was even feasible, but 1958's The Huckleberry Hound show put them on the map, with a stronger structure and more well-defined characters. But between Huckleberry Hound and 1960's The Flintstones, which would instantly become their flagship series, came the Quick Draw McGraw show, premiering in syndication on September 28, 1959. In terms of reception, it did well with its intended audience of gun-loving serial eaters, but like most of the early Hanna-Barbera library, it was not seen as a substitute for theatrical animation. There were many who turned their noses up to these cheap productions sold to a less sophisticated audience, unhappy that this was what passed as entertainment these days. Basically, Hanna-Barbera were almost the Illumination of their time. Almost. Ratings data was barely recorded for syndicated programming in this time, but I'm sure by the time Quick Draw McGraw went down on October 20th, 1961, he'd left his mark on the lives of a select portion of America. There were only about 45 million TVs in the States at the time this show premiered. Not every household owned a TV back then, but back then, every TV owned a household.
We'll give you $5,000 and a sheepskin coat to eliminate them. Do you think you can do her?
I don't think so.
I'll do the thinning around here, and don't you forget it.
The Old West. Think older. Older. There we go. A world of danger and excitement, and where you can find Quick Draw McGraw, a dopey sheriff who happens to be a horse, and his sidekick Baba Looie, a friendly burro. Together, they fight bad guys and save whatever town they reside in. It seems to change from week to week. If this doesn't sound like your cup of tea, then don't worry, this is only a third of the show. Like a lot of Hanna-Barbera offerings, it's actually an anthology, with 2 sister segments in the later acts. I'll be reviewing those along with the Quick Draw segments, but here's who the characters are in each of them. Quick Draw McGraw has his heart in the right place, but isn't smart by any means, and his problem-filled plans often land him and Baba in trouble. Remember, he's a policeman at the end of the day, and animation has never respected that profession much. Dragnet the Saint. And whenever the villain is a particularly mean outlaw, that's when Quick Draw will resort to vigilantism, donning the alter ego El Kabong and wasting thousands of dollars in smashing guitars over the crooks' heads. He tells us in one of the last episodes that he invented El Kabong because foes take him more seriously that way, and yeah, I can see what he means. His loyal sidekick is Baba Looie, who's pretty relaxed and willing to go along with whatever daft plan Quick Draw has, but Baba sometimes ends up being the one to save the day in the end. For what he lacks in strength, he doesn't in resourcefulness. He'll also often end the episode professing how he still likes Quick Draw even if he knows the horse is incompetent. Do remember this is the 50s, so since he's Mexican, he speaks in the most exaggerated accent possible. But I think he ages well in most other aspects. It's easier to remember Baba Looie for his personality and role in the show than as being any sort of stereotype. But you be the judge, and this is barely the infamous thing about the character. On July 26, 1990, on an episode of The Howard Stern Show, one of the hosts, Gary Delabate, was discussing the collecting of Hanna-Barbera animation cells when he made a grave mistake, misremembering the name of this famous borough.
Those are a little bit cheaper. Quick Draw and a Baba Booey are about $3.25.
What do you call him?
Baba Booey. Is it Baba
It's
Louie?
Baba Looie, isn't it?
Baba Looie.
Forevermore, this would be his nickname on the show, and a catchphrase for the Howard Stern Show. You have definitely heard those two words, Baba Booey, at some point in your life before. And might I throw my hat into the ring in this cultural touchstone? I understand why Gary misremembered the name. In the show, Quick Draw will sometimes refer to Baba Looie by a nickname, Baba Boy, much like how Baba will sometimes call Quick Draw Quick Straw.
How you going to catch that jackrabbit, Squeakstraw?
That's easy, Baba boy.
And if you haven't watched the show in 30 years, what are the chances you're gonna have all this at the top of your mind when you're remembering the names? Quick, what's the name of the father and sister? Got it wrong? Exactly. Ultimately, I don't care about the Howard Stern Show. I just needed to address the fact that this is Baba Looie's legacy and clear the confusion. One character I got tired of eventually was Snuffles the Hound Dog. He'll only work for Quick Draw if he gets a treat first, and whenever he eats one, he'll moan in ecstasy, hug himself, and shoot into the air, floating down in bliss. He tends to do that at least twice in every appearance. Then the joke turns around to him grumbling over not getting enough treats for the task at hand. This is every Snuffles episode. The formula is followed to a T every time, leaving little room for variety. There is some, but not enough. Lastly, there is a narrator who often pops in to rhyme for the El Kabong segments, but has scattered roles elsewhere. Barely anything plot important though, which is fine. Quick Draw McGraw takes up the first segment of every episode, while the second is occupied by Augie Doggie and Doggie Daddy, about a father and son beagle living together in this action-packed suburban world. Augie is a little ball of ideas who's carving his own path in life the quirky way, adopting wild animals, conducting science experiments, or whatever the plot demands. Some of my favorite moments in this show are when Augie's encountering something dangerous with a big, optimistic smile on his face. His father, Doggie Daddy, is your old-fashioned father figure at the end of the day, and I really mean old-fashioned in the way they both talk.
I've been studying how to be a watchdog, just like my dear old dad, father of mine.
That's my son there. He wants to be a watchdog, like his dear old dad.
If you thought 50s sitcoms writing was repulsively saccharine before, here's a parody of that kind of dialogue. I can't believe people talked anything like this once. There's other little things that make these segments a relic of a different point in Western culture, like Doggie Daddy casually smoking a pipe once in a while, but I'd still say this is my favorite segment in this show. The cheesy writing is enough to entertain me, and the dynamic between father and son is still sweet at the heart of it. For the third segment, you can always count on it being about Snooper and Blabber, a cat and mouse detective duo who solve cases and tussle with baddies. Super Snooper is the clever and competent one, but has a big sense of pride that can sometimes override those qualities. He doesn't even talk proper.
Snoop the Hazel, hoop the snazel, come in Hoozle, Hazel.
His voice actor, Dawes Butler, who voices a majority of the leads on this show, based Snooper's voice on Ed Gardner, who was famous for spouting malpropisms, or incorrect turns of phrase. With Snooper, it makes sense. He's a cat. You can't expect him to speak perfect English. Blabber is a young mouse who serves as the naive and ill-equipped assistant. They later try giving him his moments to shine, but I don't mind him that much as a player too, a little guy to keep Snooper company. I'm happy Hanna-Barbera were able to beat the old cat and mouse as mortal enemies cliche they used to play straight on Tom and Jerry. But alas, Snooper and Blabber would be my third favorite of the three segments. It's not bad, but I think the other two have more interesting leads and conflicts. But these two pairs of private eyes aren't alone. They have some recurring acquaintances, including Mr. and Mrs. J. Evil Scientist and their baby boy, a very gothic family who live in a creepy mansion. I'm guessing the writer must have really liked the Addams Family comic strip, because this was before their TV show. There's Toot Sweet, a French flea. He's French and he's a flea. What more do you want? And later on, they get some intel from their secretary Hazel on their car's speaker. Not a fully developed character herself, but I'll give the writer credit for finding all these ways to prop these private eyes up. Of all the good and bad these characters have to face, one common enemy they all share is Snagglepuss, a theatric lion prone to pulling cons and mind games. As you can see, he looked different in these days. It wasn't until the Yogi Bear show that the designers made him a puma, dyed him pink, and gave him a collar. But you can see the fun, dramatic personality is already there, and why the studio decided to make him a star. While I was watching through the Quick Draw McGraw show, I noticed that while there's an outside cameo here and there, the leads never cross over into each other's segments. That disappointed me until I found these ancient interstitials dug up by fans. Seeing them all hang out between cartoons is fun, and must have helped make the whole show feel more unified. Compared to the Huckleberry Hound show, where all its segments are best described as comedy, I appreciate how the Quick Draw McGraw show sought to make each of its segments a distinct genre. There's a western, sitcom, and mystery segment to get through. It's a real variety pack.
Can I keep him, Dad? Can I keep him? Well, look at what he taught me. Can I keep him? Huh, Dad?
So even though William Hanna and Joseph Barbera deserve that creator credit, you need to know that every single story for every single episode of the Quick Draw McGraw show was provided by Michael Maltese, even if it's unclear if that included script writing. Already a prolific writer for Looney Tunes, his services on the small screen were to be more than adequate. Lots of wacky hijinks to go around across the different segments in the Old West, caves, trains, boats, woods, the air, and outer space. Given that the two outer segments promise villains to thwart and the middle one a protagonist with unpredictable interests, you can bet there'll be lots of physical activity, either off-screen or conveyed with a total of 3 frames. Yeah, the big hurdle this team faced was in making something entertaining on a shoestring budget, then doing it again another 134 times. The visuals would have to be the least spectacular thing about it, while the storytelling and dialogue were more important to the final product than ever for animation. Like I said, the stories tend to go to some far out places. I have to imagine it must have been innovative to see this stuff at all in a cartoon made for television at the time, with this much confidence. On the other hand, you could say the same things about the Huckleberry Hound show, then the Yogi Bear show, and the new Hanna-Barbera cartoon series, and the Magilla Gorilla show, and the Peter-Potamus show, and the Adam and Secret Squirrel show. You see how Hanna-Barbera developed a certain reputation? The show this video is about came quite early into their run, and it did improve upon the Huckleberry Hound show formula in genre variety, but it's still very formulaic in style and in content. You're gonna be hearing the same catchphrases out of the characters over and over again. You're gonna see the same time-saving measures ad nauseum. These were the kind of cartoons designed to be seen 30 minutes at a time, once a week in the middle of the 20th century. It would shock the crew if they came back to life and learned that some guy was still watching them quarter way through the 21st. There is still enough creative value in this show to where I'm not bothered by how repetitive it is. If you like your entertainment rigid and familiar, vintage Hanna-Barbera should be your bread and butter. On my videos, time to talk about the animation for the 90th time. I should start with the character design. These are very flat ones, but they're appealing and ergonomic for this level of animation, which itself is extremely basic. Oftentimes, mouth movement and the slight tilting of the head are the only signs of life. Most TV cartoons are going to be doing this for decades to come, so that's not a problem at all. But the rest of the direction is about making everything as easy as possible. A fair bit of the action is conveyed through repeated animations or not even depicted on screen, and the staging is usually incredibly flat, almost as if it's being performed on a stage. I got so used to the more dynamic acting and staging in the last couple Hanna-Barbera cartoons in the late 90s. that going way back to the Quick Draw McGraw show, I can see the issue. It's not for nothing Chuck Jones once disparagingly called Hanna-Barbera's output illustrated radio. However, and this is a big however, do you think people would have cared on these things? Black and white, blue tint, 500 something lines, and a lot of people still had models that were heavy wooden cabinets with a teeny weeny screen. If you bought a television in the 50s, you would have been lucky to see and hear anything on it. So I can see why making the presentation as clean and accessible as possible was a benefit.
I'm El Kabong! Ha-ha!
El Cabong.
They could have changed the background though. And animation goofs like Baba's hooves changing color here are surprising in as limited a style as this. It is a pleasant surprise that all the segments are in full color, when that was still years away from beating black and white in popularity. It's like how a few 90s shows were produced in HD, you know, just in case it catches on. I could say this old Kellogg's commercial they did is more what I'm looking for in terms of movement and direction, but screw Kellogg's, they don't make cowboy crunchies.
How about $1,000?
A grand what?
A grand total of $50.
I'll take it.
I like that Quickstraw. He's got a head for figures. All zeros.
I thought that with how quickly television was changing when the Quick Draw McGraw show debuted, that seasonal trends would be easy to notice. That is why you should never underestimate the rigidness of these guys. These shows barely changed across their 3-season run. The most I can say is that the episode orders gradually got shorter, 26 episodes for the first season, then 13 for the second, down to 6 for the third. I'll say the first season is my favourite overall, and my favourite for the Quick Draw and Augie Doggie segments. Everything about Quick Draw's escapades was still pretty fresh, and they got the sense of humour in Augie Doggie and Doggie Daddy working right out the gate. I still can't tell how much of this I enjoy for the vintage culture shock. The second and third years respectively were fine, but not as funny or fulfilling, I feel. As for Snooper and Blabber, they had a rough first year that I just didn't find all that amusing. At least not as much as the other segments. But it actually picks up the slack in the second season. It's probably a luck of the draw thing, because I don't know if season 2's episodes are technically better than the first. It's more, I prefer these episodes by coincidence. Their third year is more of a mixed bag, some hits and some misses. But I'm amused by the fact that what's commonly believed to be their finale, Person to Prison, ends with them in the slammer needing to wait out 30 years. They were let out decades ago now. This length of time doesn't have the punch it once had. Now for the top and bottom lists. I'm giving a different set of countdowns for each of the segments, only a top and bottom 5 each because there's not much to them and they don't differ that greatly in quality. But this is still a total of 30 episodes, so buckle up. If you want, because this show predates the enforcement of seatbelts. Starting with the best Quick Draw episodes, Gun-Shy Gal gives us one of the more memorable one-off villains, Texas Tilly. Quick Draw thinks he knows how to set her straight, but is mistaken. Dizzy Desperado gives Baba Looie amnesia and makes him the new villain of the week, Little Cucaracha. Gives him something new and surprising to do, and I can let a cliche plotline like this slide for being in such an old thing. El Kabong got the Nomad's adventures off to the right start. Later installments iterated on the formula with more running gags and such, but the first El Kabong episode is still the freshest of the lot. The Lion is among Snagglepuss's most memorable outings in this show. The stunts he pulls here are some of the snappiest, and show how effective of a foil he can be to Quick Draw. My favourite segment of Quick Draw McGraw is Slick City Slicker, not just because I see a familiar face, but this new location of a newer America is a great place to drop the horses. Still near the pioneer days, but it brings to mind the oldest cinematic comedies in its time and place. As for the worst, I could start with Baba Bait. It's Dizzy Desperado again, but Baba knows who he is, and even though the context is different, it's not a good look when you can see a show like this recycling itself. Scooter Rabbit is one of those cut and dry Snuffles episodes where, if you're this far into your binge of the show, you already know all the jokes it's gonna tell, whether you're 60 or 6. too much disappointed me. The animation is particularly sloppy on this one, and it takes most of the runtime to even set this up. Yippee Coyote has an annoying antagonist. That can be enough to drag down media as bite-sized as this. When you aren't riffing on it with a friend, something old and hammy like this can be a much tougher watch. The worst would be Scat Scout Scat, about Quick-Draw trying to take a fort from indigenous territory for commercial construction. Even if it's ultimately a positive outcome that he doesn't get away with it scot-free, this is still not one to pull out at a party. It's not censored 11 bad, but the fact it's in that ballpark is enough. Now for my favorites from Augie and Daddy. Party Pooper Pop is a bit on the low stakes side, but I like what it says about parenting. How Doggie Daddy tries to get Augie to showboat at a friend's party by taking part in his own interests instead of his son's, all while barely showing us the party. Pup Plays Pop is a deliberate role reversal on the part of the characters. Augie attempts to father his father, but his senses of limits and discipline are nowhere in sight. High and Flighty gives Augie a spaceship to fly around in. That is a strange thing to give him, and Doggie Daddy panicking while his son's having the time of his life up there is good fun to watch. Gone to the Ducks features one devilish duck, just the cutest little dickens who exists only to bother Doggie Daddy. Not in especially malicious ways, just unfortunate ones. The duck did not pay me to write this, if you're curious/suspicious/help me. Pop's Nature Pup is my favorite episode of the whole Quick-Draw McGraw show. Sure, it's no less a product of its time than the others, but this really put Augie in his element, out in the wild, stirring up shenanigans for him and dear old dad, and it all ends with a big surprise. But these two weren't always pumping out winners. Patient Dad gives you quite the wacky set of misunderstandings, with someone sabotaging Augie's doctor playtime to mess with Daddy. I guess misunderstandings of this wackiness are still kryptonite to me, no matter the vintage. But it might have been innovative to see this for the first time 65 years ago, who knows. Horse Fathers is about Augie getting his father a horse for his birthday, and the horse being a pest and getting to stay. One of my least favorite pets they got. Skunk You Very Much is one of their more mangled new pet plots though. The skunk seems to be a metaphor for stranger danger, but by episode's end, Daddy doesn't mind it hanging out with Augie anymore. It's like, whoops, show's over, we ran out of time, figure it out. Fuss and Feathers is the same deal as Horse Fathers, but with an irritating ostrich. I like the ostrich way less than the horse from a comedic standpoint. It's a Worm Day is the most stress-induced and stress-inducing of these, but even with the worst episode of these two, there's still something to like about the dialogue, no matter how flat the jokes are. Now, there are a couple Snooper and Blabbers that impressed me. Impossible Imposters is one of them, the old evil robot duplicate scheme, with the expected setups and punchlines, but no less convoluted than when a more modern cartoon does it. Not So Dummy is a cool idea. They come face to face with a living ventriloquist dummy. Even in a show as light as this, that's still a spooky story to tell. Deductives is a silly good time. They have to hunt down a rare species of duck and, oh no, it's the baby duck from earlier, here for more accidental mischief. Hop to It is the kangaroo episode. If somehow you're old enough to remember watching this on TV in 1960 and a light just went off in your head, that's a good sign. Kangaroos used to be so powerful in animation. What happened? My favorite Snooper and Blabber caper would be the Outer Space case. Who knew all it took was a little change of scene? I'll need to check out whatever Hanna-Barbera shows I can with a space theme because this is a very charming aesthetic. And these aren't very charming episodes. Desperate Diamond Dimwits is an old-fashioned, deer-headed and rudimentary tale, even by Hanna-Barbera standards. Almost nothing will stick with you, it's a very bland one. Hula Hula Hullabaloo is their trip to the then brand new state of Hawaii, but a lot of later Hawaiian tropes must not have formed in pop culture yet, because this just feels like self-tourism for the sake of self-tourism. The Flea and Me doesn't feature old Frenchie Mick already forgot his name, rather another flea they don't have to animate in detail outside of close-ups, and one of those climaxes that goes nowhere. The worst Snooper and Blabber ones would be some early juvenile cases, Big Diaper Caper and Baby Rattled. Baby Pants Bigby doesn't exactly strike fear into the heart, so it's a lot more pathetic that Snooper and Blabber struggle to catch him. These were tough episodes to talk about individually. You personally might not be able to tell a difference in quality between Pop's Nature Pup and Scat Scout Scat. I will say, this is a very consistent show, but only consistently good enough for its time. Something this old, rusty, and antiquated is further out of my comfort zone than usual. But why not? I've done this 90 times in 6 years, it's about time I experimented. I think I value just about every show I've ever reviewed a little bit more knowing how far back the groundwork goes. Yes, even these ones. But at the same time, I also value something like the Quick Draw McGraw show for helping lay that groundwork. Animation might hardly exist anymore if shows like Huckleberry Hound proved that it can make the jump to different mediums, and Quick Draw McGraw proved they can survive those jumps for several years, so long as they give their audience something new. They may not seem like much anymore, but the first couple Hanna-Barbera shows greatly helped animation find a bigger place in the world of entertainment. And don't you forget it.
Don't float away. Magic School Bus will be right back on Fox Kids.
See you next time, folks.